someone who could explain it to me. Because I think for us to assess this new deal, which we will find out about apparently after 3:45 p.m. today, after they come out of being in camera and vote on it, we will find out what the details of the new deal is. And so I want you to hear the details of the old deal. And when I was reading through it, I couldn't help but think, what's in it for the city of Calgary? Because it's not obvious to me that the city benefits at all. Except for, I guess, in the more indirect way of benefiting the Stampede and having a National Hockey League team. But I'm talking like brass tacks, dollars and cents. Where is the money coming from for the city of Calgary? Because that's what I'm going to assess the new deal on the basis of. Because they're going to fork over the lion's share of $600 million. Then for it to be justified, to me, there has to be a revenue stream coming back that will either pay off or more than pay for that, or you have to see some kind of increase in property tax revenues that justify this kind of expense. And so those are the things that I'll be looking for. But if the new deal's like the old deal, I don't think it's going to meet any of those criteria. And we'll tell you about that with my first guest. But first, let me play for you a little bit of the interview that Gord had this morning with Ward 6 Alderman Jeff Davison, who has been leading the effort on this. And let's give him some credit. He restarted a process that was dead. And so if he's managed to come through and come up with a deal that does benefit Calgarians, then you know what? He deserves a pat on the back. So I'm trying not to prejudge, because this is the clip I'm going to play for you about how everybody's prejudging this and they haven't seen the deal yet. But listen to what he had to say about it when Gord asked him the question of whether or not there's going to be sufficient revenues to justify this. Here's what he said.
I mean, I think there's a lot of conversation about these things will or won't generate certain things. I think at the end of the day, no one has seen the deal, so I find it a bit troubling that we're commenting on something we already haven't seen. But I think, what's interesting about it is the fact that, you look to places like Nashville, you look to places like Edmonton, you look to places like Winnipeg. I mean, these things, the world has changed, and if you're going to build a single-use arena, you should probably expect not to get your money out of it. When you uplift a district and you build an event center that is really about more than just hockey, well, now you've got something. Now you've got a significant tax base that you can build. And, if we go back, it's important to remember, I want to expand our tax base, not our tax rate. And so when we start looking at the idea of how does our city start to get to the point of, not getting to continual tax increases, it's really about, create operational efficiencies and invest in capital infrastructure that pays you dividends. But you have to do those at the same time.
Okay, so that's where he's going with this, is he wants to uplift an entire district, expand the tax base, and build a capital project that will generate dividends, all of which sounds really great on the surface. So now let's try to get into a little bit about what the current deal is with my guest, Moshe Lander. He is faculty member in the Department of Economics at Concordia University in Montreal. He also teaches economics in Calgary every July and August, which is why he is here in studio. If you want to see what he looks like, you can go onto Facebook Live and have a look at us there, because we'll be talking for the next half hour live. So, Professor, I was sort of shocked when you sent me because I was pleading with someone, please explain to me what the current deal is with the Flames. And you did. So I want to walk through some of that, because I still feel like I must not understand something, because it does not look to me like the city gets any value out of it whatsoever. They own a building that they get no revenue off of, no property tax revenue, no shared revenue. All they really do is have the Flames paying the operating bills and the maintenance costs for them. But I'm not sure that I see that. This seems a pretty one-sided deal to me.
Completely. It's a totally one-sided deal. And, I appreciate the clip that you played a couple of minutes ago, but where the counselor was saying, we shouldn't talk before we've seen this 30 times, because in every NHL city, this is pretty much the same deal that happens, which is the city gets almost no benefit out of the actual arena itself, but they put up a good portion of the cash to do it. Okay, so then a current deal, you call it a bit of a shell game. So the city owns the building. Yes. And so in theory, I guess you're supposed to get some value out of that, except for I think everybody is talking about just blowing the thing up when it's no longer needed. So where's the value? Right. The Saddle Dome will have been around for about 40 years by the time that the new library arena is in place, because that design makes it look like it's a downtown library, not an arena. But by the time that thing's in place, it's going to be 40 years old. And the traditional end for an arena is that, you blow it up, you turn it into a parking lot, and what used to be a parking lot becomes the new arena. So, in that sense, it's also a shell game that you're just moving it from here to here. It's not going to create new economic activity. It's not going to create new tax base. It's not going to create some wonderful arts district or river district or anything like it. Nothing's going to happen. It's business as usual.
Well, because normally when you own a building, it's supposed to have some value. This one, in this case, has no value. Now, the Flames pay the maintenance on it. That's got to be significant.
Yeah, and especially after the flood a few years ago, right? That building needed significant upgrades to just get back to normal. And the fact is that by any standard, it is an old arena. So it's kind of reaching the end of its natural life. And so, it's probably a significant cost. But that just means that the city's not paying for it. It doesn't mean that the value of the property is going up. It doesn't mean that the value of the arena is going up. It's just that you're maintaining something that's in its final days.
Yeah, because as we discussed, whatever you put into it doesn't matter, because the thing's being blown up at the end of it. So the Flames do need to have some revenue to pay for the maintenance of it. I get that. The Saddle Dome Foundation then pays about $2 million in funds to Winsport, Hockey Canada, and Parks Foundation Calgary, instead of receiving rent from the Flames directly. So how does that work? So this $2 million a year going into the Saddle Dome Foundation, that's supposed to be a contribution in lieu of rent?
Yeah, so, if the city is saying that we would have to pay for Winsport ourselves because we need to maintain the infrastructure of the '88 Olympics, and the Saddle Dome Foundation comes along and says, listen, we'll pay for that stuff so you don't have to, City Council, but in exchange, the Flames don't really have to pay rent on the Saddle Dome. That's kind of the quid pro quo that's going on here.
So where does the Saddle Dome Foundation get that $2 million in funds from? Does that come from the Flames, or does it come from the revenues they generate off the building?
It comes from some of the revenues that are generated. So in whatever, the deal's changed a few times in the last 20 years, but to some extent they get a portion of parking revenue, concession revenue, ticket revenue, advertising in-house. So all of the boards that have the various Tim Hortons and whatnot that would sponsor whatnot, they get a portion of that. And so out of that, they're paying for Winsport and the others.
I don't know how you would calculate what the market rent should be on a building like the Saddle Dome, but $2 million a year seems very low.
Given that the Seattle is about to get the 32nd and probably final NHL franchise, and they're going to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of around $6 billion US just to get the team. Forget putting on ice operations, just to merely say that we have an NHL team. $6 billion US. These days, that's about 8 billion Canadian. I'm sure that you can generate a little bit of revenue out of that team and pay it into the city's coffers.
Okay. Is there any way to get a sense of what the market revenue on that should be? Because you've got now essentially a valueless building, because sometimes you figure out what the rent is based on the value of the building and the resale value amortized over a period of time. I don't even know how you do that on renting an arena.
Yeah, it's extremely difficult. And in part, it's difficult too because none of the teams will publish their accounts, right? That's the great conflict between players and owners whenever strikes and lockouts come out, is that the players say, show us your books, and the owners say no. They're private corporations. They don't have to really show anything. So the Saddle Dome Foundation, because it's a nonprofit organization, has to show something. And so that's the way that you can kind of put cash into the economy and keep the lion's share behind closed doors where nobody can see it. And that's in part, I think, why we're having in-camera discussions today, is because the Flames don't want to truly reveal their hand to the general public as far as what they're actually worth, how much money they're making.
For a whole variety of reasons. That creates problems with them in their negotiations with their players.
Absolutely.
But that also probably creates a demand on the part of taxpayers for them to pay more.
Completely.
Okay. Maybe you could get a proxy for that, though, because there must be a fee that they charge to single use, like the concerts that come through.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Saddle Dome can seat approximately 18,000 people now after the flood. So 18,000 people, you say the ticket on average is around $100. 40 home games a year. Let's exclude playoffs because it's never guaranteed. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about 20,000 fans, give or take, that are paying $100 on average, that's $2 million a game. 40 games, $80 million coming in just in ticket revenue. And then add on all of the advertisers, and you've got to kind of figure out that there's only so much board space that's going around. And proud sponsor of the Calgary Flames, and anybody who puts that into their own advertising budget as well, you're easily talking about probably somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe $250 million a year in revenue. Subtract off operations, subtract off players, subtract off the very expensive travel and medical costs and things like that. There's just no way that these teams aren't making substantial amounts of money. Let's say that a 10% profit margin, you're talking about they're making $20 million.
And so with that in mind, is $2 million being spent in rent a reasonable amount?
No, I mean, they could be paying substantially more and not being put themselves in any financial difficulty.
Okay, well, especially since one of the things you point out, especially with naming rights, the lion's share of that $2 million in funds would come from the Scotiabank in exchange for naming rights. So Scotiabank pays a pretty penny for that.
Sure, and before them, remember, it was, what was it, the Canadian Airlines Saddle Dome for a while.
Was it ever Talisman? No, Talisman was Lindsay Park.
Yeah.
Right.
No, and there's substantial money in naming rights, and that's why businesses themselves want to put their naming rights on it. It's great PR for them, and even there, it's how you extract the maximum amount of money from your advertisers.
Okay, it gets even more complicated because then we bring in the Calgary or the Stampede, and that I think is important because to understand why it is the Flames' original proposal from in West Calgary or west of downtown didn't go forward, I think it's because they were trying to extricate themselves from the Stampede, and the Stampede obviously gets a pretty lucrative arrangement out of this too. So we're going to pause and figure out how the Stampede and the Flames agreement works, but I'm still not seeing any benefit to the city of Calgary at the moment. So this is why I'm sort of curious about what this new deal might look like. My guest today is Moshe Lander. He's faculty member in the Department of Economics at Concordia University in Montreal. Teaches economics in Calgary every July, August. You can watch us on Facebook Live, and we'll be right back on 770 CHQR. My friends, we are trying to understand this deal. But as my guest said, this is the kind of deal that they make in every city that has an NHL team. So let's go through it. We figured, so essentially, just to summarize, you've got the city that owns a building that they cannot sell and will blow up at the end of it. The Flames pay the maintenance on it in the meantime. They pay $2 million in lieu of rent to the Saddle Dome Foundation, which then uses the funds for Winsport, Hockey Canada, and Parks Foundation. The $2 million happens to be about equivalent to the naming rights that Scotiabank pays in exchange for it to be called the Scotiabank Saddle Dome. And someone reminded me, it was the Pengrowth Saddle Dome after it was the Canadian Airlines Saddle Dome. Thank you, my friends. So I need to understand what the deal is with the Stampede. So the Stampede and the Flames have an agreement because the Saddle Dome is on Stampede lands, isn't it?
Correct.
And so tell us a little bit about that deal.
So in essence, it was put on the Stampede ground because that was part of the development plan for the '88 Olympics. So by putting it on Stampede land, it's owned by the city. So even there, you don't have to pay rent in a sense because the Flames can say, hey, listen, if we're going to have to pay rent, then we want to own the land rights to where we're locating. We want to be able to set up where we want to. If you're going to constrain us to a certain amount of land east of McLeod, then this is our negotiating position. We're not going to pay rent to you.
Okay, and the Stampede, being owned by the city, being a nonprofit, it doesn't pay property taxes.
Correct.
So all of this area doesn't have any property tax revenue going to the city of Calgary.
No.
Okay, so then they've got revenues that come from concession, comes from parking, comes from ticket sales, come from luxury suites, other restricted access areas, investment income, in-arena advertising for all events, Flames, Hitmen, Rednecks, concerts, international competitions, Stampede. That just gets shared between the Stampede and the Flames?
Yeah.
And so how much of it goes to the third major partner in this, the city of Calgary?
So if you're gonna put city council on the hot seat and you're gonna say, how do you get money out of this? They're gonna tell you the story like the councillor said on your clip at the bottom of the hour there. They're gonna say, well, we get economic activity in the city. In raising the profile of Calgary as being one of only 31, soon to be 32 cities that has an NHL franchise, having the Stampede, we get all of these tourists that come in, we get all of the spending that happens on 17th Avenue when people go to the bars, and that generates property taxes for us. And so that's really how we get our money, is that it's indirectly through the economic activity that the arena creates. The problem is that the arena does not actually create economic activity.
No, because if you blew up the arena and the Flames moved elsewhere, you'd still have 17th Avenue and you'd still have people going out and spending money, and those businesses would still be paying property taxes.
Exactly. And the fact is that, you, everybody has a limited disposable income. So if I choose to spend my disposable income on Flames tickets, it just means that I'm not spending my money going for sushi on 17th Avenue. So all I'm doing is I'm putting my money in that building as opposed to somewhere else in the city. So if you tell me that this is going to create economic activity. Well, it might, but all it's doing is it's taking economic activity from somewhere else in Calgary and moving it down there. The fact is that for Flames games, really, how many fans come into Calgary to watch the game? Even if we say that fans are coming down Highway 2 from Edmonton, how many are we talking about? And how many of them
because that would be real money that's coming to the city because of the game.
Correct. And how many are we talking about then? Out of 18,000 fans, we're talking about maybe a couple hundred. And how many of them are staying overnight? And if they're staying overnight, are they merely displacing somebody who's staying overnight on their way through to Banff for a ski trip? So when you kind of net it out, the real economic impact of an arena and a hockey team on the city is pretty close to zero. There was a study that was done a couple of years ago that looked at what would happen if all of the Chicago sports teams were to just pack up and leave Chicago. So when you factor in baseball, basketball, hockey, football, if they all left, it was determined the economic impact was pretty much zero, meaning that teams don't really contribute to the local economy. It's just they merely take it from somewhere else and create economic activity on the backs of somebody else who's losing it.
Let me put forward the argument that I found persuasive, this community revitalization levy, because part of the deal up in Edmonton was that Daryl Cates, who is a businessman beyond just the team, pharmacies he owns as well as a bunch of other land. As I understood it, the deal was that there would be development around the arena and significant. I mean, they're building massive towers. I think there's 10 big towers that are being built there. And the argument is all of that came as a result of this deal, which seems to be pretty persuasive.
Right, except it's not. Not that it's not persuasive, it's just that it's not accurate. So what you find is that when you build an arena, the idea that somehow that's going to create economic activity is not really true. It's the other way around. It's that area in downtown Edmonton was starting to show signs of life. The years before the MacEwan University kind of redevelopment and all of the development that was going on 104 Avenue, 109 Street, and kind of that growth. When you drop the arena into that, it just accelerated the growth, but it didn't create it. The word that City Council is using these days is that they want the arena to be a catalyst for growth, and it's never a catalyst. You can't create growth just because you have an arena that's in use 50 days of the year. There's 300 days where that place is sitting dark, and even if you tell me that Taylor Swift is going to come every week, that's only another 50 days. That arena does not create the growth. In the case of that area out in Calgary here, there's kind of a limit to what can be done there because the Stampede grounds is restricted growth area.
Right, and if it's on the Stampede grounds, because we've already talked about, they don't pay property taxes, so you don't get the benefit of having increased property taxes.
Correct, and we're already seeing that the East Village is growing on its own. It has nothing to do with the Stampede. It has nothing to do with the Saddle Dome. And anything that's growing kind of on the other side of McLeod is growing because Calgary is just a natural growth spot, and that downtown is completely going through an overhaul. So that's not the arena. So to promise the Flames that, look, we will give you some of the property tax that comes out of that new development to help you pay for the arena, well, that's just property tax that's being taken out of the city's pocket then that could be used for firefighters, police officers, or green line extensions, or anything else that's currently ailing the city, relief for property tax business owners that are suffering. And so the fact is, it's just moving it around from one place to the other. It's not creating something new.
Would there have been greater benefit in the proposal that they had in the West Village?
No, that Calgary Next was doomed from the beginning. And I think it was just a trial balloon by Calgary Sports Entertainment to kind of get a feel for the pulse of the city.
Okay, but here's some of the reasons I would put forward about why it would be. First of all, you're not having to share revenues with the Stampede because then you can get a revenue sharing agreement with the city. All of that area would be new property tax revenue, whereas right now, because of the creosote, it's a net loss to the city. It would be a catalyst to clean it up, and you'd be able to get more residential moved in there. It seems like that would be a site that you could make the argument that you would get more property tax value, more residential value, more commercial development value, more retail and restaurant value.
So even in the absence of the Calgary Next project, you can see that the West Village is sprouting up. It's just naturally growing on its own. So again, if you drop in that Calgary Next project where it was going to be the Stampeders and the Flames and everybody else out there and their uncle, that place was growing on its own. So whatever property taxes are going to be generated out of the West Village is now just going to go into the Flames' pockets. So at least now where you're keeping it on the Stampede ground, that property tax is at least helping alleviate a very significant financial problem in Calgary. If it had created new economic activity, fine. Just remember that all that's going to do then is it's going to destroy whatever's going on out on 17th Avenue towards the east end and just move it to the west end. So, you know, when a politician will tell you, hey, look at all the new economic activity that's being created here, true. What they're missing is look at all the economic activity that's being destroyed. In doing a proper economic analysis, you have to include those costs as well as the benefits. And that's why I'm saying that it usually brings the net contribution to close to zero.
Because the 17th Avenue Red Mile will no longer be the Red Mile anymore.
Absolutely.
Okay, last one, another wrinkle. Saddle Dome Foundation is made up of 3 city appointees, 3 provincial appointees, and 1 each from Windsport, the Stampede, and Hockey Canada. So you've got $2 million dispersed back to the organizations that have directors sitting on the Stampede board.
Nice little self-serving board of directors there, right? I mean, I guess somebody has to be on the board of directors, but there's a certain aspect here that when that money is going to Windsport, and then you have somebody who is from Windsport sitting on that board of directors.
I don't have a problem with the 3 provincial appointees and the 3 city appointees. But perhaps you need to have 3 more independent people on that board.
And if you challenge them, they're going to say quite straight-faced that that's in the best interest of taxpayers and the Saddle Dome Foundation, because at least the representative from Windsport will tell you how best to spend the money on Windsport. In the absence of that,
why doesn't the city of Calgary say, sure, if we're going to be a 1/3 partner, let's get 1/3 of all the revenues that come from all of these sources?
I would challenge them to do exactly that. What's going to happen is that tomorrow morning we're going to see Ken King surface, and he's going to say, in the absence of a deal where the city puts up money, then I'm taking this team to Houston because they're going to give us an arena with a better deal, and you will be without hockey and live with that for the rest of your life.
He would never do. An owner would never do anything like that, would they?
That's exactly the Daryl Kate story, isn't it?
Moshe, thank you so much for giving us your analysis on this today. Now I'm going to see what my listeners have to say about it. Moshe Lander is faculty member in the Department of Economics at Concordia University in Montreal, teaches economics in Calgary, July and August, which is why he was here, and we will talk again. Thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
We'll be right back after news on 770 CHQR.